Welcome to Tevent Talks, the show where we uncover the humans, this time behind the business. And as you can see, I'm joined by Tengo, my former guest on the stage.
Hi, hello Tengo. There. Thanks for inviting me again.
What of course. So we have a very special reason for inviting Tengo. It's because we're today going to be joined by two fellow Georgian startup women. Two technical founders, female founders from Georgia, who are now backed by Y Combinator and are gonna launch on Product Hunt very, very soon. So next week. So if any of you are in Product Hunt, make sure to look it up. The company they founded is called Theneo, and they produce API documentation, but next generation API documentation. And the mission is really to make it accessible for everyone, not just for tech giants. And make it really easy to kind of generate and maintain those. But without further ado, we're gonna welcome them on the stage so they can introduce themselves and we can start our questions. And in the audience, you got it, ask questions, exactly, press on the reactions. And we have a new integration into Tevent as well. Annie has got it already. We have GIFs with sound, so make sure to use those as well. It's quite fun. Okay, Maria, Anna, do you want to join us?
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. I was just exploring lately. Oh, I love that GIFs with sound. So I'm really obsessed. I've been using it for so long now. So
yeah, it's super fun. Hi, Maria. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So, guys, this is very impressive because Maria is in Seattle and Anna is in Georgia. So they have 10 hours difference and we're in the middle. Okay, guys, do you want to do a very quick intro and then we can jump into the questions? Anna, I see you're already representing Theneo. I love it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this event. And I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Anna. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Theneo. And my background is in engineering. Specifically, I became obsessed with APIs and then API documentation. And then here we have Maria. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm the CTO at Theneo currently. I'm working on automating a lot of pipelines that can make work experience for our users a lot easier. And I'm working with Anna since last summer on this project.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, it's an honor to have you here. It's really, really exciting. I'm going to jump into the questions. Guys, you know how this works, but obviously this time Tengo and I are going to share questions. You guys on the audience, again, make sure you write your questions in the questions box because we're going to answer them live at the end with 10 minutes that we're going to leave. And at the very end, you're going to have the chance to move rooms to the discussion room in case you want to turn on your camera and interact with Anna and Maria directly. So question number one, and I find that really, really exciting because I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that they have an undying passion for API documentation. And when I interviewed Anna, she said, look, like I discovered such a passion for API documentation so much that my manager told me to shut up about it. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that love came about?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that most people find it really boring, but for me, and to be honest, for a very long time, that was not something that I even cared about. So when I was working as software engineer, and especially with bigger companies, I would write my own API and then, give it to a technical writer or explain what I did, how, and be like, okay, you know what, you take care of it. Especially with bigger companies, you have like several people that are working on that, like a proper documentation. So I didn't really care about from that development perspective. And then when I joined a few other companies and I started integrating with like so many different APIs, I realized how much documentation impacted my entire experience as an engineer. And I realized that I judged companies by their API documentation. So, and I have seen like so many, great big companies having this really bad API documentation. But, for those, you have to really integrate with them because they have that name, right? But with smaller companies or even emerging startups, if the API documentation is not done properly, you have so many options to go with. So as developer, if I would receive, for example, I had use cases where they would send me a PDF even, and I'd be like, hell no, I'm not working on this. There is no way. I don't care what product you have. I'm not working on this. So, and we're also working on our own documentation. And then I remember first time when I looked at Stripe's documentation, I was really in love. And, that might sound so stupid, but I was really obsessed about it because in just few scrolls, I could find all the information that I needed. I could get a whole sense of like what a company was doing, how they were doing, and how could I utilize everything that we're offering in my own application. And I was talking about Stripe's API documentation for so much. Yeah, like my manager and like my coworkers like, okay, like get a room, like chill. But like for me, like that was like how I realized how much difference it really made. And then like that's where it initially started with the Theneo. It was like building Stripe like API documentation. And then I reached out to Maria, and then Maria had her own burst of ideas more from ML perspective, because my perspective is from API, right? And her perspective is all about ML. And she was like, oh, we can actually automate this and like give suggestions to the users. And that was something I actually never thought about it, because like from engineering perspective, like I would write the API, but when it came to content, if I had to do myself, I would look it up what others were doing, how like what like other good companies were doing, kind of like looking at their content, making it my own, and it would take a lot of time. And Maria was like, "Well, you know what? I can take care of all that." I was like, "Oh my god, that would be so great!" So we became so excited about this, and like that's the topic now. We're our everyone that is working at Theneo, they're also very much excited about what we can deliver and how we can make it excited for other developers so they can love working on API documentation as much as we do.
I love that. Thank you so much. So that really means you guys kind of like almost complete each other in terms of skills, and that's amazing. So like, I mean, the first learning here is like love what you do, and then you will be the best at it. And I can see that with you. But I think that leads me really nicely to my next question. So you mentioned like I sat down with Maria and I brainstormed all these ideas, and then in my head I had to ask, I had to pop the question, will you be my co-founder? How did you feel about that? And Maria, like, how did you feel when you were asked?
So like the backstory about this was like, so when I realized that, this was beyond just a side project, I knew that I needed to have a co-founder. And I kind of like pulled a list of people, and Maria was on top of the list. But I remember actually, like, I think I still have messages. I told my friend, most likely she's going to say no. Because I mean, for those that do not know Maria, like she didn't really, say all of her background. She's a rock star. Like, she worked at like Google, Facebook, DeepMind, Twitter. And when I reached out to her, she was working as a machine learning engineer at Microsoft. And she has a PhD in computer science. But even if you remove the, all her like amazing resume, she's like one of the most wonderful person that I have ever met. And we met at Google I/O, and like we had this great connection. But I'm like, I don't know, like probably she might find it boring. And I don't know, Maria, why did you say yes? Let's do you.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect that Anna would ask me that. At first, when she asked me for like a call, I thought mostly like she wanted my opinions or something like that. And when she said like, "Oh, would you work on this?" and I was already getting excited about the idea, especially like with the way she talks about it. There's no way you cannot get excited about the idea, and like already started thinking about like, oh, what would I do? Like, what could I offer her to like also complete the product and so on. And since I was already like brainstorming this and I was already so entertained by this idea, when she asked me to be her co-founder, I was extremely busy at the time. I had a lot of other commitments, but I didn't want to say no. So I was like, let's take like a month and see how it works. And if I can manage to have time for this, like that would be so great. And since then, I never even doubted that this was the right decision.
Awesome. The question is, did you get on one knee though?
I couldn't because I was on Zoom, but if I were in person, that would be interpretation of that.
I love that. That's so cool. Tengo, I think you're next in terms of questions.
I am next, yes. So this is a beautiful love story. But moving on to kind of the other elements in terms of kind of the diversity side. So both of you are from Georgia, like myself. I was wondering for you guys, what were the challenges that you encountered, regarding this and raising in terms of like, spending your later youth or young adult years in the US, and how that affected you being able to establish yourself, and vice versa. Did that bring any positives being from Georgia?
So there are a few things. One story that I have is recently we launched our premium subscription, and one of our first customers, he actually reached out and he was like, I heard you are from Georgia. I was like that's how we started the introduction.
That's
and like
were they Georgian or
sorry?
Were they Georgian?
No, from US. They heard about Georgia and they were like, like for them, that was kind of like attention grabber, or like, oh, they're from Georgia and let me reach out to them. And then we started talking about the product and they really loved it and they signed it. And like they ended up being one of our first paying customers. So there one thing that is, people remember you, because they don't really know a lot of people from Georgia. At the same time, you have to explain where Georgia is. You might get labeled Russian.
Yeah.
Not cool, guys.
Yeah.
For everyone watching, not cool.
Yeah, I remember in college, I used to get called Russianish girl, not even like, Russian-ish, because that's what they could relate.
Oops.
Ooh.
You're back.
Okay, great. I think being an immigrant in the US definitely, for example, my case is really helped me to get out of my own bubble. Like being in tech, I think I was really comfortable. Like I started coding when I was 13 and I was living in my own world and I really loved it. And then in US, I realized that I needed to get out and do a lot of take on a lot of opportunities, go sign up on different organizations, start applying everywhere for internships, and I ended up getting an internship at Google my second year and all that. It's just because I think as an immigrant, I was really hungry for that success, and also you never know when those opportunities can what happens, you don't know, so you're I'm gonna get anything that I can. So that was my journey on that case. In terms of the company and investment, there are definitely right now investors that are looking at Georgia and looking at more these countries that are getting more startup attention, Georgia being one of them. So it definitely helped. In Georgia, I think from investment perspective, investors are just starting to learn also about the startup ecosystem. And I think startups and investors are learning together on what are the proper things to do. But Maria, what was your experience on that side?
Yeah, I think very similar. Just it feels like you're kind of an outsider at first when you come to US, from a very distant country no one ever has heard of. But it can relate to a lot of people because especially I came here as a PhD student and there are a lot of PhD students that are immigrants. So they're very relatable. You can find people that will help you out because I already went through the same process. And I was lucky to find those people. So, and I found Anna through the same connections and so on. So I think it's really great that people that went through the same situations, that are also Georgian, also female and so on, you can find each other, you can share those those things with each other. And I feel like that just makes you connected on the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm all for pushing the investors to come to Georgia for the Khachapuri and to stay for the startups. So yeah, and you also mentioned. Sorry, Sonia.
I'm gonna pretend I know what that means.
You'll try khachapuri soon. Now it knows all about it. Basically, it's cheesy bread and it's heavenly.
Oh yeah, you know it, the boat thing.
Yeah. But yeah, Maria, you also mentioned being female, and I was wondering how that affected your experience raising money as two female founders. Obviously technical founders. What advice can you give other women in a similar position?
I think so. For us, where it means a bit more that we are both female founders is that we can relate to each other a lot and we can connect on like many different topics. Like whenever we talk to investors on like different calls, we literally sometimes finish each other's thoughts. So that is great. Other than that, I think like our product is really great, right? And then we have enough technical experience, so we haven't had really anyone doubting that we are able to build the product we are building. So I think mostly it affected in us in the way that like we are female founders and there are not that many startups out there that have two female founders. So I hope that like sets us apart on like every other agenda, right? Because it's full of like startups that are by men. Anna, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think I was mentioning that before, that in tech, saying two female co-founders is rare. Saying two female co-founders in dev tools is like really, really rare. So I really am proud of our team, and we have other female team members as well, and especially on like more leadership positions. And that's something like for me personally, it's more of a drive. It's more of something I'm like, I want this company to succeed, not just for personal reasons, but because I want it for others and other female engineers or entrepreneurs to see this very successful dev tools company.
Awesome. Yeah, I think already a role model for many female tech people. So yeah, keep it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think same when kind of coming from Georgia, I think this is kind of something that makes you stand apart. So hopefully that will also help you to really make it. But it seems like you're definitely on the way. I mean, backed by Y Combinator, launching on Product Hunt, you already have like 1,200 users, I think. So it's just looking very good. So super proud of you. I'm going to take the next question, which is a little bit more of a challenging one. But Anna, you mentioned that you're not a first-time founder. You've done it before. You founded a startup before, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience will be quite interested in hearing about that. So what was the project, and why was it a little bit less successful?
Yeah, so I was always interested in like kind of a startup environment, and so in college I started a startup with my friends, and we wanted, like, I was living in New York that time, and there was always a problem with storage. Not really enough space in apartments. Everyone wants to store like their during summer, like their winter clothes in some storage units. And also like people that were visiting, they wanted to like store their items, well, like for a few hours or for a day, etc. So we built these boxes that we wanted to set up in stores, like in convenience stores, where you could just scan it and like put your items, or like put it for a long term. And we had like our own prototype, both from hardware and software. Our team was basically, everyone was technical, like hardware engineers and software engineers. And it was such a great experience from the perspective of building the entire product. And it was more of, if you ask me now, if it was less of a tech company and more of like operational company. But like in college, like no one, or university in Europe, they don't like teach you how to build product from scratch to end, right? And you don't look at like a business perspective, customer perspective, you might only be looking at the engineering perspective. So like building the whole cycle, that was really, really interesting journey, and it completely failed. It was like also a lot of us were foreigners, and we were going to these convenience stores and asking them for a space. And like imagine, I don't know, like 20-year-old Georgian girl with very heavy accent coming to you and asking you for a space. They're like, get out. That was that was the case. But we're like going from one store to another. Like I didn't care. Like it was an experience for me also how to convince people, how to sell it. And there were like two things that you need to sell, right? People that will sell you the space, and then selling the idea to customers. And unfortunately, so Amazon has this product called Amazon Locker. If you do not want your products to be delivered at your home and instead in lockers, you have that option. Even though our business model or customers were really different, they were going after the same convenience stores that we were. And obviously competing with Amazon is really difficult from like with convenience stores. They're like, oh, like you're a startup, you're like in your early 20s, and yeah, I'm not gonna trust you. I'm gonna trust Amazon. But you know, we were at different text, you know, pitches, startup pitches, and that really helped. Pitching to investors and pitching to customers, that really helped me, and it made me realize that I love doing all this. And like later on, it helped me like get more leadership positions in different companies, and then eventually ended up being as head of engineering. I think if I didn't do that experience, even though it completely failed, I would not end up being confident today in what I'm doing as a CEO at Theneo.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's super inspiring. I mean, like also the tenacity to kind of go after it, although you were, you know, very conscious that you're in a foreign country and competing against Amazon. That's very impressive. But again, I mean, when I listen to that, for me, that confirms like do what you love, and that's what you're really good at. And like now, how successful you are by just doing that kind of like engineering aspect, and that's awesome. So I think it's an inspiration for everyone.
One thing,
Maria, yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I would say is that what I learned was that like that product, that process was really enjoyable and I loved it. But then I was not really that passionate about the product, right? Like obviously I was the user, but it was not really that important for me. So like with Theneo, it's so different because I built it specifically for me. It was a side project and then later on turned into a startup. And like it is becoming way more to like what I have imagined. And that's because thanks to Maria. But like it started from that love of and being like obsessed about APIs. And I think like with startups, that plays a huge role because startup is not that easy, right? It's way more complicated and way more time consuming than like real jobs, like 9-to-5 jobs. So like you gotta do something that you love, otherwise it's gonna be really difficult.
So the secret to success is passion. I was just gonna ask before we move on to the next question whether Maria, you had like a similar experience in your past that was like a major learning and kind of prepared you for Theneo.
No, actually, I have never worked on a startup or even thought about working on a startup. I was going more on the research direction. That's why I did my PhD and so on. But I'm extremely lucky to have Anna because like everything she said, like, selling to customers, doing these talks, like being very confident in our product and so on. Like, I'm just like really grateful. I have someone like her next to me and like can do and teach me all that.
Oh, that's why we have such a great match.
You guys are so cute. I can't handle it. Well, I'd also like to add one thing about the doing what you love. You guys might have already heard of it, but I think for somebody listening, it might be cool to check out Ikigai, which is a framework for thinking about like what job you want to do or what you want to work as. So it's about doing what you love, doing what you're good at, also doing something that the world needs, and doing something that you can get paid for. And so if you can find something on the intersection of those four, it's kind of the golden sweet spot that would recommend. And for me, I have a question about remote work. So I'm currently working remotely. You guys, I've heard that Theneo has 7 employees over 5 time zones, if that's correct, which is pretty wild. How do you manage that, and how do you find the remote culture in terms of like what are the pros and cons, and do you have any tips for working optimally in a remote company?
We are still figuring out how to manage that as well. So if anyone else also has good tips, that would be good to hear. But basically, like, it's the way it works right now. Anna and I like sacrifice our sleep time mostly to make sure that rest of our team, can work normal hours, and we are not like overworking them, or they are all very happy working for our startup. So that's kind of how it works now, especially now that like we are participating in Combinator. We have some set schedule that we want to try to accomplish. So it's it's all about like making our startup as successful as we want. And like I'm happy just waking up and like start working on everyday tasks that I'm working on, because I'm so excited about seeing the result. So that drive definitely like it takes us a lot more forward than like worrying about our like setting out very healthy work schedule for me and Anna. But for the rest of the team, I think hopefully we made sure that like they are not overworked and they get all the time they want for the tasks they need to do.
Yeah, right now, like for us, for me, like what I have noticed is that I sleep and wake up with my computer. The first thing that I do is like start, responses to Slack. The first thing the first thing that I do is team stand up. Like, so, and we both, Maria and I, have a crazy schedule on that perspective. But there are advantages and disadvantages of remote work. First is that it's easier to find a good talent when you are not bound to a specific location. But yeah, there are challenges also, in a sense, like how do you make sure that people are not overworked? Because long term, it doesn't help. They are not going to be more productive. So we try to, even like when we do daily stand-ups, we start with an icebreaker of like different questions. And we use this product called spinach.io. It's a great tool. And then like you have an icebreaker, and like we ask different questions of like, oh, what was the last thing you have watched? Or like, and then we will start talking about, I don't know, like Star Wars and stuff like that. And kind of like making it also not just about work. Otherwise it can become really tiring. And also we do sessions like brainstorming together and make sure that everyone is involved, and it's not just me and Maria, but like every team member's opinion and voice matters to us. And when we do it together, even though we are in different time zone, it doesn't feel like we are like distant from each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so a lot of culture, a lot of team building as well.
Yeah.
I just checked in with Tango. His laptop crashed or something, so he's joining with the phone now, fortunately. But yeah, no, I guess that's quite challenging. So I've heard that a lot in terms of like it widens the pool of employees, but keeping or of talent really,
Mm-hmm.
but keeping everyone together, it might be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think I have no doubt that you girls will manage that like big time. We're not going to wait for Tango. He's going to join in a second, but I'm quite keen to move on to the questions. And then before we go, I'm still going to give you a little bit of a platform to like, if you want to plug something. Hey, Tango, you're back.
I'm back.
But I would say let's, at this point, involve our lovely guests a little bit. So I think there's a really good question here with 5 votes. So is open sourcing your product a threat to your business and its potential income? That is because that is someone I know, and I told him that you put it on GitHub, and it actually like gained a lot of traction. So the question was like, is that a threat? Are you not scared that someone will copy it?
Sorry, there was a misunderstanding in our call. I didn't put it on GitHub, so I was asked to put it on GitHub, but I instead put it like on a kind of like a private beta.
Right.
But there are open source options for API documentation, and I have used a lot of open source options, or I have used a lot of products that are out there. A lot of those have different limitations, and the reason why I started even working on this is because I could not find the tool that would fit all these use cases that I have.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't know is that, oh, like there were the things that also bothered other companies. One thing with open source options is that the companies are always dependent on developers. I remember that, like, for example, someone from customer success would ask us to change something like a text, right? Or even add a comma. For that, they would need to go on Jira, create a new ticket, ask for a developer to deploy it, all these things, which, it should not be the case for the flow. Also, open source options will not give you an option to auto-generate the documentation or like give you suggestions about the content, which is something that we are working on. So it's with any other options that are out there, for us, it's just we need to make sure that we have a value proposition for our customers, how we are better than other options.
So not open source is the response to the question.
Yes.
Nice. Yeah, well, I guess that makes a lot of sense. Someone said, I also went up against Amazon last year. Great learning experience. Love this. I'm not sure who that is because they're a guest, but thanks for sharing. Do you have any comments on that, Anna?
Yeah, Amazon is definitely tough. I would never, for anyone that is going against Amazon, like, great job. I don't know like how you do it, but I would support you. Just ping me and I would support you.
Yeah, amazing. All right, we've got one more, and guys, this is a chance for you to ask questions, so don't be shy. We have another 15 minutes in this room, but we can also move to the other one sooner. So Givi is asking, how is Y Combinator going? Would love to hear about that. Are they helping you to get big companies as customers, or are they just giving you lessons that will help you get there?
Well, they are giving us the lessons that will help us get there, but also, like, obviously the fact that YC backed us gives us a lot more reputation to talk to bigger companies as well. There are other companies that were YC startups in the past, and we have like really good connections with them. So, and also obviously, like, the big plus for us is that we can talk to other startup founders that are in the same batch with us, and we can share the experiences, also like share our products, talk about collaboration. So that's pretty much where our most useful feedback is coming from right now.
Yeah, for me, like, the biggest value out of Y Combinator is other companies that are in our batch, for example, learning from them. I think so far I have learned way more from them. Like, what are the strategies that they're using? What are the things that have worked for them or haven't worked? Like, when you have so many, like, for example, we have this, the way it is structured is that you have sections and then you have kind of like subsections. And then we are with other dev team companies. And we are sharing of, like, for example, developer marketing. Like, marketing in general is really different from like when you are specifically targeting developers. What are the things that they have worked, and the strategies. And when everyone is sharing their ideas, it's just so much more useful. Another thing that I really love is that when you are hearing from other companies that are really successful today, and when you hear from them how much they have failed and how much they got up and like still continued, like, it gives you more drive and more confidence that you are not, that you can do it as well. Because one thing is that Y Combinator is great, but you can also get lost in a sense of there are a lot of great people and a lot of great companies. I would be lying if I didn't have those moments where I kept questioned myself, where you look at a company and they have more than 250,000 developers using their platform, versus you when you just have 2,000 companies. It's hard to sometimes not feel like, oh, like, what, like, shit, like, what do I need to get to be on the same level, right? But it's but I starting to learn more, like, how to isolate that noise and like be concentrated on like in your own path and learn from others as much as possible, and building more connections than anything else.
That's so inspiring.
I'd love to ask a bit more about YC. Like, can you talk more about kind of the interview process? How was that? And do you have any tips? Like, what is it that they're looking for? Aside from what they mention, is there anything that's a secret?
So I think YC says themselves that there is no formula that they know of that can tell them this company will be successful or not. I think a lot of times they concentrate on teams, the co-founders, their background. And for us, when I look at back of the application that we have filled out, it is very different to actually the direction that we are going with today, or how we thought the things would be. Like some of the things I'm even looking, I'm like, that's so stupid. But like in terms of the interview, for us, it was really helpful talking to other YC companies that were in the past, like did the whole process. And one of them actually gave us a mock interview. And that was really helpful because we realized that there were things that we need to concentrate. For example, it needs to be 50-50 conversation when you are with your co-founder. And like there were like a lot of like specific feedback about us that we needed to concentrate, and that really helped. We also wrote down a list of things that we wanted to cover. And the reality is that can you guess how many of those we covered during the interview? It was 0. Nothing that we covered in, like we wrote in the list, none of it was discussed during the interview. So there kind of like the feeling that I had was, okay, we will not get in. And it's okay, we will try next time. And if we have it even on messages like saved in Slack when I was telling that to Maria. And we didn't hear back the next day. We were actually in Portugal doing Web Summit. So I think there was the whole connection issue. I don't know, but we didn't get the call the next day. We were like, okay, yeah, we're not in. But Maria was not actually. Maria was the one that was still like believed that no, like there's still a chance. We still didn't get a rejection. So
Yeah.
and then later we got a email telling us to call them because they couldn't reach us. And then we called them and they told us that we got in. And I don't know, Maria, do you want to tell about the process, about like the kind of the questions we got asked?
Yeah, I mean, I get literally the like acceptance email when I had my transition flight to Portugal in New York, and I just landed and read the email, and I just wanted to start jumping, but there were like so many people around and trying to like calm myself down. I did stay positive. I thought they would accept us still because like when we had the interview, I got the feeling that like they already did some research on our startup and on us, and we got we got a lot less questions than we expected. Our interview wasn't that long, but I thought like they directly asked us the questions where they could have some concerns about our startups, but it felt like they already like were interested enough to check us out, right, and then interested enough to remember our startup. So I was really hopeful on that, and obviously like when I get the email, I was really excited. Like I directly tried to call Anna, but she was in Portugal, so like I had to call another team member, and then she reached Anna, and then she finally called me, and we were like, oh
yeah, we were
like,
it was a roller coaster of emotions, to be honest.
Well done though, very nice. Moral of the story: do not go to Portugal if you're expecting an important call.
Yes.
Very nice. Tengo, do you have another question?
Yeah, again, like for like early stage founders or like entrepreneurs, like what would you say should be like the first steps to focus on? Like what are the initial, say, like first 3 to 6 months? What should be the priorities, and how should one approach like setting up a startup?
So I think one of the things that I'm still learning at YC is don't try to be perfect and just launch your product. Get those users, get that feedback, talk to your users. I think that's something that is highlighted a lot at YC, and that's something that I'm still learning, not to try to be not being perfect. If you go to platform, like we definitely have bugs. I mean, there is no platform that doesn't have bugs, but I remember like I didn't want to post on several platforms like announcing that I know this is live, because I was like, oh, like this could be this way, this could be better, like we are not yet ready. Like there was always that thing that you think that it needs to be perfect, but that's not the case. You can launch as soon as possible, get those first users, and talk to them, interview them. Even if you don't have the product yet, the MVP, still talk to potential users. Reach out, like find out who would be your users, and find out what are the other solutions they're using. What are the things that they hate? What are the things that they love about it? And then see what you can use that out of the information to build the product that could be potentially the thousands or millions of people will love.
I just saw Tim reacting with a happy emoji. I think you just made our CTO very, very happy.
Happy to hear. Maria, what's your thought on that? I know you.
I would just add, like, focus on team too. I mean, find the right co-founder, obviously, but like I feel like it's so helpful to have like a few people at least that helps you out, and like you already know them, or like you have some trust in them. That definitely is like taking a lot of stress and like a lot of help that you would need. Like definitely will help you to make your startup a lot better than what you would do alone.
Yeah.
And for you guys, like this was already in your space, like API documentation. You mentioned Anna was your kind of thing. For people maybe doing things that's maybe like not directly relevant to what they've been doing historically, is there like what kind of approach would you recommend for getting the first customers or the first users?
Well, do the research, right? See who are the people in that. First, find experts. Maybe first try in your network who are the people that have some experience in that specific field. Talk to them and kind of understand that field as much as possible. So if you're not an expert, try to become an expert. Learn from them. And then start doing more research of potential customers. But I would say first try to understand that field really well before you start going after potential customers for user interviews, because you need to understand that space really well in order to ask right questions.
Yeah, for us, like Anna is definitely API expert, so we could jump on that part. But first, customers definitely we got from like people Anna knew that do API that need API documentations, or they could use improvement on that. So I think that's really helpful to already know the people and the community around the product that you would be creating.
For sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, do your research basically. Love it. Okay, Tango, do you have another one, or shall we move to the discussion room where we invite everyone, by the way, where you can like actually put your cameras on and talk to us as well? Yeah, but before we do that, I was going to say thank you, Anna and Maria and Tango, for joining us. And I wanted to know, like, maybe there's one little thing, last thing you want to plug. Is it the product hunt launch? Is it something? Is it everyone get Theneo? I'm just going to give you a 1-minute platform.
Thank you. So for anyone that is actually has any interaction with APIs, please reach out to us. We'll put our emails in the chat box. So with any type of user interviews that we can do, we are always really appreciative. We love negative feedback. So please don't be shy. Send us anything that you hate about the platform, or what the things that you love with the existing platforms that you are using. And if it's hard for you, please send us all the feedback. We would love to talk to you. In terms of product hunt, we are planning to do it next week. So please be, the best thing would be, let me write down our website. Please, you can subscribe to our newsletters and we'll send the notification. And we would really appreciate to get as many upvotes and comments as possible.
Do it, guys. I think I've put your website in the links as well. So yeah, it was really fun to have you guys here, and it's such an interesting product, and it's going to continue rising the way it does right now. So everyone, I'm just going to tell you quickly how to get there. You're going to see an arrow on that side, and yep. No, that one? Yeah. And so just click the back arrow, and then under the stage, you'll see another room, and that's the discussion room. So just join us there if you want to have a group chat with any of us. Thanks, guys. See you next time.